This version of Linguine and Clams is 100% American Italian. I learned it from the American Italian actor Tony Giorgio. Tony appeared in over 200 movies and television shows like American Me and The Godfather, where he played the role of Bruno Tattaglia. If you remember the scene when Luca Brasi was killed, it was Tony's idea to impale Luca's hand on the bar with a knife. We used to have dinner at his place once a week for many years until he passed away. This is his way of making linguine and clams, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hello, my fellow Italian food fanatics. Today we're going to go into the kitchen and we're going to make linguine and clams American Italian style. This bears no resemblance to the Neapolitan dish that's spaghetti alle vongole or linguine alle vongole. This is the American Italian way of doing it. It bears no resemblance to the real Italian way, but it is what the Italian immigrants and the way they used to make it. In fact, I learned it from one. Here's the dish right here. So, without wasting any more time, let's get into the kitchen. We're going to make something that you're going to love, I hope. Oh, by the way, give me a thumbs up, like and subscribe, hit the little bell button. Now, come on, let's get in the kitchen and get this made. Today, we're going to make linguine and clams American Italian style. And to do that, we're going to need, first of all, our olive oil. Now I use 100% California olive oil, and that's what I suggest that you use. We're also going to be using some garlic, some fresh garlic. Now this is a lot more than you would if you were making a traditional Italian dish. We're also going to be using some white wine, some clam juice, canned clams. Now, I suggest that you only buy a non-GMO brand, and the best brand that I can find so far is Crown Prince, believe it or not. They're whole baby clams packed in water. They're wild caught, and it's about as good a product as you can get as far as I'm concerned, okay? And we're also going to be using some red pepper, some oregano, some basil, which is not really traditional, fresh basil, and to finish everything off, a little bit of parsley, and of course, some very, very good linguine. So let's get started. We'll get started first with our garlic. And though I know you don't need to learn how to peel garlic, I wanted to show you an easy way. If you take it in your hands and twist it, just like this, the garlic will peel without a problem. Now, obviously, you don't know what kind of garlic you're going to get. We have a couple of blemishes here, but we'll take care of that. If you twist, you'll be able to peel the garlic very simply like this. All right? One more time. And we're pretty much good to go. Let me get one more clove in here. And that's done. So there you go. That's how you peel garlic in an easy way. All right? We're also going to want to trim the garlic, cut out any blemishes or anything like that. Take the ends off, because we're actually going to be eating this garlic. Unlike in the more traditional Italian recipes for linguine and clams, in those, the garlic is taken out, and then it's taken out and not eaten as part of the dish. It's just used for flavoring. Here, we're actually going to be using the garlic in the finished dish, and so what we want to do is we want to trim it up so that it is nice. In fact, I'm going to replace this one. That's not so good. What you want to do is you want to cut it up into small pieces, just like this. You don't necessarily have to be exacting. In fact, I like it in this iteration of the dish to be somewhat irregular like this. All right. Why, you ask me? I have no idea. I prefer it this way because this is the way that I learned from an old Italian-American guy how to make this particular dish, and this is the way he did it. So in homage to him, I like to do it the way that he did it. It doesn't really make a big difference in the end at the end of the day in the dish, but it's a cool way of remembering where I learned this particular American Italian style of making linguine and clams. We're also going to finish the dish with some parsley leaves. Now I've already washed and removed the stems, and we're not going to really finely chop this. This is more of a very rustic sort of a dish, but what we want is the herbaceousness of the parsley. And so we're going to give it a rough chop this way, because by the time the heat from the dish actually hits the parsley, it is going to cause it to theoretically wilt. And so we don't really need very, very fine amounts of parsley. I think that's about as rough a chop as you want. All right, give it one more go through. Get some of these little leaves here. And we're pretty much done. That does it for this. Now I also have some basil here, and what I've done is I've also washed and destemmed it. I didn't dry it, but what we want to do is we want to just tear it into pieces this way. You don't want to cut basil, you just want to tear it. And so we're going to tear it into manageable pieces, even though when it gets into the dish, you'll see how it's going to shrink down. It's no surprise of how, but we want to tear it up, and in doing so, if there's any blemishes on the on the basil, we want to get rid of those as well. You can see there's one right there, so we're going to take that, get rid of that, and then use the rest of the leaf.
And we'll fast forward through this whole thing.
So there we are with our basil. Now it's time to go to the stove. Okay, now we're on the stove, and we're going to give this a little bit of heat. And of course, we're going to use a generous amount of olive oil, because what we're going to do is essentially put our garlic in, but we want it to be on a very, very low temperature, okay? We want it to slowly cook the garlic without browning it, okay? We want it basically a blonde garlic or a white garlic. And to do this, what I like to do is put the pan just like this. I use a big bowl, and I'll put it behind it in order to hold up the pan this way. And we'll turn down the heat to very, very low and let it just bubble away. Now, you have to be extremely careful if you use this method, because believe it or not, if this falls, you could have a disaster on your hands. So I'm not telling you to do this. I'm just showing you the way that I do it. All right? So what will happen is that oil will very slowly heat up, and you'll see the garlic bubbling away. It's starting to do that now. You can see there's these little bubbles that are coming up, and it'll begin to sizzle, but very, very, very slowly. Don't rush this part. Start a little bit early. In fact, you can do the garlic and the oil, keep it on a very low flame, and then go about getting your other ingredients in mise en place to get ready for this. But don't rush this particular part. We'll be back when this is at the correct color and temperature. All right, we're not there just yet, but I wanted to show you what it kind of looks like when the garlic begins to sizzle a little bit. And I'm actually going to turn down the heat. You can see my hand here. I've got it on like 1 or 2. It is extremely low. And you got to be careful because the heat is going to hit this handle right here. And this is going to end up very hot, for me anyway. But I know what I'm doing. I'm used to it. I'm just telling you, if you're going to use this method, to be extremely careful. There we go. All right, as you can see, this garlic is now sizzling away. It's still on a very, very low flame, but it is sizzling away, and we're almost there with regard to the color. You notice how it's just starting to turn a little bit golden. All right, just a tiny bit. So we have a few more seconds to go. In fact, I think we're almost done with it. Done with this this part of it. Let me get that one in there. You want to get everything in the oil. So you can see that they are sort of golden already. All right? And that's exactly what we want. We don't want them any more than that. And we'll add some wine. And what we want to do is bring the temperature up and reduce the wine and cook out the alcohol. We're not going to reduce it a tremendous amount, but we are going to cook the alcohol out of it. Now, what will end up happening is, you see how beautifully golden those cloves of garlic are? They're going to become very, very soft and quite delicious in the final dish when you get one of those. Again, this is not the Italian way. This is the American Italian way, because in Italy you would never use so much garlic, and it would never be in large pieces like that, and it would typically just be used to flavor the oil, and then it's taken out, or chopped very, very fine so that it melts into the oil and disappears. But that's not the way we do it the American Italian way. I don't like saying Italian American. I like saying American Italian, because it really is American first and Italian second. So we'll wait for that to come to a simmer, and we'll be back. Okay, you can see that our wine has come up to temperature. It's slowly boiling away, and it's cooking off the alcohol. Now you can get the perfume of the wine, and you can smell when the alcohol is actually evaporated, when you don't smell any more telltale alcohol smell, believe it or not. And I believe we are at that point. So we're going to take a little bit of clam juice and add it in, and wait for that to come up to temperature. And when that does, we'll be back. All right, our clam juice has come up to temperature, and now we're going to add in a little bit of hot pepper flakes and some oregano. Now I like to use organic oregano, because that's the kind of guy I am. There we go. And we'll also go ahead and add our clams in there. I have 2 cans of those clams, of the Crown Prince. Now you have to also be careful when you use this stuff. You have to wash the can, because you don't know where the can has been. You don't know where your can has been. In addition to that, you don't know when you cut it open. You don't want the top of it, which would be very, very dirty, going into the liquid, or the liquid going on there, and then you're going to eat that. So I take care to with soap and water, wash the entire can, believe it or not, so that we don't run into that potential problem. So we'll bring this up to temperature, and we're going to go ahead and add our basil in here now as well. I like to add quite a bit of basil, believe it or not. I like the taste of basil. I like the flavor that it imparts on this particular dish. And now, traditionally, American Italians would add dried basil. But we are moving away from that sort of mentality, because back in the day, it was very difficult to get fresh basil. So they would use the dried basil, plus you could travel with it, what have you. But today, fresh basil is ubiquitous. We can find it everywhere. And eventually, this will wilt down and really be nothing. So it seems like a lot, but believe it or not, it's going to add a tremendous amount of flavor along with the oregano and the wine and the clams. And we'll bring this up to temperature, and we'll be right back. In the meantime, while we're waiting for our sauce to come up to temperature, we're going to make our pasta water. Remember, with me, we add 4 cups of water. Turn on the flame, and when it comes to a boil, we'll then add exactly 2 teaspoons of regular table salt. We'll see you back when that has come to a boil. All right, our water has come to a boil. Now I've gone ahead and placed a lid on top to make the water boil faster. These are professional sauce pots. They don't come with lids typically. So what I have done is I've used a lid from another pot that I have, and it has now come to a boil. We will now add exactly 2 teaspoons of regular table salt. You don't have to use kosher salt. Salt is salt. But you want to add it after the water has come to a boil. Otherwise, over time, the salt, if it sits in cold water and comes to temperature, will basically pit the bottom of your saucepan or whatever pot you're going to use. Now in this case, I'm only going to make 1 portion of the linguine, and here it is. But if you were going to do this for more, you need to use a little bit more water. You don't have to boil it in copious amounts of water. All right? That's a fallacy, and it doesn't have to be at a rolling boil. That's another fallacy. Pasta can be cooked below the boiling point and still work. But what must happen is that when this pasta gets into the water, is that it needs to be stirred. It needs to be stirred only until the starches gel. Then after that, it doesn't have to be stirred that often. All right? People say, oh, it needs to be stirred so that the pasta doesn't stick together. And that's true, but only until the starches have gelled. It's very possible to just leave pasta in a pot without it boiling, believe it or not, and it will not stick. So, now that the pasta is submerged, and it is at almost, again, another rolling boil, we'll give it a couple of more stirs just like this to ensure that the water gets between the strands and that the starches gel. Now, in this iteration of Linguine and Clams, we won't be using this pasta water for the final dish. At least I don't think so. We have it in the event that we need it, but the way I'm going to show you how I do it, I don't think we're going to need this pasta water. But the reason why we cook it in such a small amount of water is because we want those starches to leach into the water. In the event that we're going to use that water to finish the pasta, that starch helps make the final dish far more creamy. So this will boil, and now we'll turn our attention to the sauce. So now our pasta is cooking away. And here is the clam sauce. It's been simmering now for about 2 or 3 minutes. We're going to let it simmer for a couple of more minutes, and then we're going to take it off the heat. Now I'm only going to make 1 portion of linguine and clams for myself, But if you're going to make this for a family of 4, you would use the entire pot. You'd put it in a larger pot, and then when your pasta is done, you would add the pasta into the sauce and stir it around. But right now, if you need to cook to order, like we're going to do typically in a restaurant, they will make this up in advance, and then throughout the evening, they will use it to make as many orders as they need. All right? So we'll let that, we're going to turn the heat down just a little bit and let it simmer away until our pasta is ready, and we'll come back at that time. Okay, the pasta is almost ready. It'll be ready in about a minute or so. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take some of this sauce. I've just put it aside and got a skillet or a saucepan out, and we're going to finish the pasta in this skillet. So we take the pasta and we put it in the skillet, just like you would do with traditional linguine and clams or any pasta dish. We want to finish the pasta in the sauce. All right? This imparts a flavor to the pasta that is the sauce, essentially. All right? So we're going to finish it in here like this. Now, you can see that we don't need essentially any of the pasta water, because what we have here is copious amounts of sauce that will eventually be sucked up by the pasta and will also evaporate because it's on a higher heat. Okay, we're back. And you can see that we are almost done. You notice how the starches have leached into the sauce and made it somewhat creamy. And now there's only one way to tell if the pasta's done, and that's by tasting. And that is perfectly done. So what we're going to do is we're going to plate up. Let this reduce down for maybe 30 more seconds, and we'll plate up. There you go. Okay, so here we are. Let's taste this thing, how sweet it is. I'm going to give it a little bit of a... Now, the thing is that you saw me put Parmesan cheese on this dish. And of course, that's definitely not Italian, all right? It is American Italian, though. And typically, it's the Parmesan cheese that comes out of the green canister. That is the way in which we American Italians learned how to do it, because there was a time when you couldn't get Italian cheese, or you were in a place it was too expensive, what have you. And so it's not the traditional way. In fact, there's no cheese on linguine or spaghetti and clams allowed. That's against the law. But that's the way the Americans did it. I'm not sure why it worked its way into that, but that's the way. Wow. That has an excellent clam flavor. The pasta's perfectly cooked. It's briny. It has a little heat from the hot peppers, and it's delicious. It's the way that I remember it when it was taught to me by an old Italian actor, believe it or not, who played in a lot of gangster movies. In fact, he was in the movie The Godfather. He played the role of Bruno Tattaglia. His name was Tony Giorgio. So this is what his Linguine and Clams was. His parents immigrated from Italy, and they lived in Herkimer, New York. And that's where he was born. They operated an Italian grocery store. So throughout his travels, I learned this from when he was in his late 70s and early 80s. This is the way those old Italian guys in the new country made linguine and clams. Let's give it another. I remember nights sitting with him, and he would make this dish, and he would add the Parmesan cheese to it, and I couldn't believe it, because even then, I knew that cheese didn't go with seafood in general. But you can even find that rule broken in Italy. Here we go. This brings back a lot of memories, some good times. Of course, now he's passed away. Man, you got to try this. Admittedly, it's not as good as the fresh clams. It can never be. But if you're in the middle of the United States and you can't get a hold of fresh clams, you want to do this the traditional American Italian way, you can always use the canned clams and some clam juice, and you're going to be just fine. As long as you buy a good quality canned clams, you're going to be fine as well, okay? You don't have to use fresh basil. You can even use dried basil, and it'll come out great. Thanks. Now, come on, go make this. Now, a lot of people don't like to use oregano in this dish, but oregano and clams work. All right, it works perfectly fine. In addition to that, the old Italians used to use, the American Italians used to use dried basil. In this iteration, we used fresh basil. Why? Fresh basil is fresh basil. It's just better all the way around the block. However, oregano, believe it or not, is better dried than it is fresh. And that's why we used a dried version. Using parsley to finish the dish can be done or not done, depending on whether you have it at hand or not. In the wintertime, in some places, it's just impossible to get fresh parsley or anything that's worth spending that kind of money on. And so in that case, you don't really need to use the fresh parsley. It just adds a nice herbaceousness to the dish that I particularly like. All right? Now, you can also finish this dish with adding a drizzle of olive oil like they do in Italy. That adds to the dish's complexity and richness. You don't need to do it, but if you like that sort of a thing, you can. Also, the American Italian way is to add lemon juice to the sauce. I don't particularly like that because I believe that too much overpowers the subtle flavor of the clams, but you can try it, okay? It does taste good. It's just that I think that it takes away from the clams a little bit. Maybe if you add just a tiny bit. Now, also, typically people put butter in this sauce. And now that's really the antithesis of Italian cooking. However, butter and lemon juice make everything absolutely delicious. So, if you want to try that along with the parsley and the Parmesan cheese, go right ahead. These are different variations that I'm not necessarily going to make for you because it's no big deal. You're going to see me add a little bit of lemon juice or butter or what have you into the sauce. I don't think it really needs it. I think if you have the cheese, which is again not really Italian, that it adds a richness to it on its own, okay? So I would think that you would choose one or the other. You either choose to have butter in the sauce or choose to add a little bit of Parmesan at the end to tighten it up and make it rich. So now that you've got everything, let's continue on. I've also heard of people using bacon in linguine and clams. Needless to say, bacon is smoked, and so that's a huge flavor that you don't want to add to this dish. It doesn't belong. This is not clam chowder where you want to use bacon, but this is a linguine and clams. It should be light and fresh as opposed to cloying and heavy and full of smoke, okay? I've also heard of people adding heavy cream to this dish. Now, it's possible, but remember, if you do add heavy cream to it, you want to add cold cream to a simmering sauce. Otherwise, it's going to break, all right? And mix it in really, really good. Don't overdo it, but I've tasted it, and it does taste good. It's just not to my particular liking. So, you can do those things. You can add cream And also, you can add bacon, but I suggest that you don't add bacon. Please, please, please do not add bacon. Please. Thank you. This pasta must have, or this dish must have a long pasta, whether it's linguine or spaghetti, as opposed to short pasta. You don't want rigatoni or penne or any of these shorter pastas. I don't know why it demands a longer pasta. It just does, all right? There's a feeling you get with these dishes that when you eat them, you must eat them with a particular shape of pasta. So, for example, pastas made with a tomato sauce are better if they're short, in my opinion. Like, I don't like spaghetti with the red sauce. It's possible to eat it, but I like it more, for example, with rigatoni. So this dish demands essentially that you use a long pasta. You could even use bucatini. I wouldn't suggest it, but it's possible. Or the long fusilli, which again, I don't like, but again, that's a long pasta. But linguine or spaghetti, and not a thin spaghetti. No thin spaghetti. No angel hair, okay? Angel hair is no good. It cooks too quickly, it becomes mush. All right? Angel hair is its own special thing. We'll talk about that in the future. Here, you want a high-quality linguine or spaghetti.